In one of the previous videos, we mounted a shared folder from OpenMediaVault virtual machine on Proxmox, and then we passed it further to Jellyfin Unprivileged LXC container. And both the VM and the LXC container were running on Proxmox. But many of you have noticed that you can only read from that remote location on OpenMediaVault. I mean, our unprivileged LXC container, in that case was Jellyfin, it cannot write to that remote location. So today I will show you why is that and how to change that default behavior so that LXC container can write to VM. And in fact, it doesn't matter what virtual machine it is. It doesn't have to be OpenMediaVault. It can be a TrueNAS, Unraid, or maybe a completely different VM that you have there. And it doesn't even matter what LXC container you have. The method I'm going to show you can be applied to any VM and any LXC container that you might have on your server. We will also understand why privileged container can write to that remote location, while unprivileged container cannot by default do that. And we will see what we have to change to get that write permissions for unprivileged LXC container. So for this video I use the OpenMediaVault again, just because I already have it up and running, and my shared folder is called OpenMediaVault. So I'm in the storage, shared folders, and you can see name OpenMediaVault, relative path OpenMediaVault. We will need it later. Note that when you add shared folder, you have to set correct permissions as well. These are mine, the default ones, so admin can read and write, user can read and write, and everybody else can read only. So I didn't change it. So this OpenMediaVault has the default settings. And I also have a user. I created one user and it's called SMB user. And we will use it to connect to this share. And basically this SMB user will have that read and write permissions to that shared folder. And first, let's go back to Proxmox and mount this Samba share to the Proxmox itself. This is my Proxmox. I will go to PVE. You can see 202 is my OpenMediaVault VM. I've got also some Ubuntu, but we can ignore them. What I need now is PVE, and I go to shell. In this shell, I will create it maybe in, let's go to cd mnt. If we lsl, you can see it's empty. I will create a folder here called minipc. I believe that's what we used the last time. So I use makedir command to create a new folder. And we call it minipc. So if I do lsl now, that is my empty folder. And to mount that Samba share, I need a utility called CIFS, so I have to install it first. And the command is apt-get install CIFS-utils. In my case, you can see it's already the newest version, I've got it installed, but you probably will have to run this command. So now we can mount that remote folder, that OpenMediaVault folder, to the local mnt/minipc folder. The command I need is mount-t CIFS. Then I use -o. This is to provide additional information like users, passwords, like group IDs that we will learn about later. So my user is SMB user. Now I have to specify that remote location. So what's the IP address of OpenMediaVault and what's the folder I want to mount? So if I go back to OpenMediaVault, if I go to network, interfaces, I changed my IP address to 192.168.1.202. And the last digit, 202, will match my virtual machine ID. That's what I always do, like 202. I know if the VM ID is 202, then the IP address is 192.168.1.202. So that's what I use in my command, 168.1.202, and then the name of the folder. And the name of the folder is here in storage, shared folders. And I called it OpenMediaVault. So I go back and I say OpenMediaVault. And now what I want to mount it here locally on. And I use the folder that I've just created. So it's mnt minipc. Now the password I configured for SMB user. And that's it. If I now run mount-l command, I will see here at the bottom that mount. And I want you to inspect that all output, because we've got username SMB user, but note that user ID and group ID. Currently it's user ID 0, group ID 0. Why is that? Because I mounted that remote location as user root here. I'm still user root on this Proxmox on the PVE node. If I run command ID, That's what I am. Root has user ID 0 and group ID 0. That's why it has been passed like that to the mount command. I hope that makes sense. And if I clear that maybe, if I up arrow, I simply bind mount that remote location from that IP and that folder. I mount it to local folder mnt mini PC. That means, if I Control C, if I go to that mnt mini PC, I should see the content, whatever I have on OpenMediaVault, on that virtual machine. So let's do that. LSL, that's my folder. If I cd to mini PC, LSL, I can see marek1.txt. That's in fact the only file I've got there on my OpenMediaVault shared folder. So this content comes from OpenMediaVault. It's not here locally on the Proxmox. Whatever is on OpenMediaVault, I will be able to see by going to this location, mnt mini PC. And the important thing, at this stage, we should be able to read and write to remote location from the Proxmox itself, I mean. Because this user I specified here, user SMB user, should have read and write permissions. So if I, for example, touch a new file called marek2, I should be able to do that. Now if I do lsl, I've got two files. Maybe to make it even clearer, if I go to another machine, like this is my MacBook, and you can see I also connect to the same OpenMediaVault folder from here as SMB user. If I go to that folder, I indeed can see both of those files, which only proves that I am able to write to that remote location from the Proxmox itself. And you have to make sure it works as expected, because without it there is no point even to go any further. I also want you to notice that this mini PC folder belongs to root, I mean root user and root group ID, because that will change later on. And the ID of root user is always 0. User ID 0, group ID 0. Okay, so far nothing looks strange. All works as expected, so we can try to pass it further, this location, to our unprivileged container to see what happens. And I don't have a container yet, so let me quickly create one. So I click here on Create CT, means Create Container. I will give it ID of 203. The host name, I will call it Marek LXC. I will create the password for the root user. I will click Next. Now the template, I've got one template available, but any template will do. And I just want to say, there is no such thing like a Jellyfin LXC container. It's basically one of those templates with Jellyfin installed on top of that. Or you can install anything else you want. You can have you can have all of your programs on one single LXC container. But that doesn't really matter, it's not our topic, so we click Next. Disks, 8 gig, it's fine, it's just for the testing purposes. Click Next. CPU maybe 2. Next. Memory, the main memory I will put 4096. The swap can stay as it is. Next. Network, I will put static IP 192.168.1.203. As I said, I am matching the ID of the either VM or LXC container, so it's easier to remember what IP it is. It's /24, gateway 192.168.1.1. That's my home router. So I click Next. DNS, leave it as it is. Next. And finish. That's it. Task OK, so that's completed. I should see my... Oh, I already see it. The name has just changed to Marek LXC. So I can now start my container. Took a few seconds and the container is up and running. So I just double click on it and I can log on to it. I use root and the password I've just provided during the container creation. That's my container. Let me cd to the root folder, lsl. These are all the folders available here. And what we did in the last video, on the Proxmox, if I go back to Proxmox, we run command pct set, then the ID of the container, 203, then we created mount point, -mp0. Now we specify the local folder we want to bind mount, which is mnt mini PC, and the mount point on the container equals shared. That means in the root location, I will create shared folder, and it will be bound to that MNT mini PC here on the Proxmox itself. So I just click enter. That's it. Now if I go back to my container, and if I run LSL again, look what changed. I now have shared folder. If I scroll up, it was not here previously. So I either can create it manually and bind it to the Proxmox host, or if it doesn't exist, it will be created for me. So if I go there, cd shared, LSL, I can see both of those files that are on OpenMediaVault, that are passed to Proxmox host, and then from Proxmox host are passed further to this container, to this unprivileged container. The problem with that is I cannot write anything. So if I touch Mark 3, I've got permissions denied. And some of you might notice that the pct command created that shared folder for user nobody and group no group. And maybe you think that this is our problem, but believe me or not, this is not our problem. Even if you changed it to a root, it would not solve our problem, and we would still not be able to write to that remote location. The issue here is how host system, and in our case it's Proxmox, but in fact it can be any Linux distro. The issue is how that Linux handles privileged and unprivileged containers. In fact, if I changed this container to privileged one, I would be able to write to that remote location. Why? Because my root user ID and group ID on the container and on the host would be the same. If I run ID on the container, you can see I am root here, and the user ID and group ID on the container itself is also 0. And for privileged container, it would be seen on the host system on our Proxmox as coming from user ID 0 and group ID 0. So nothing would change there. That means the folder permissions would match the user root, and I would be able to read and write to the shared folder. However, we are running here unprivileged container, and the difference is that even though the container looks exactly the same, as you can see, I'm still root on my container, but the request coming from this container on the host will be translated to something different. Our Proxmox will add 100,000, value of 100,000 to the user ID and to the group ID. So effectively, on the host, for root user on the container, on the host I am seen as user ID 100,000 and group ID 100,000. This is to prevent so-called container escape hack, and that's why they are considered unsafe. If I had privileged container, and if I could hack my way out to see other folders on the host system, then I would basically gain full control of that host, because I would be seen as a root, and root can't do anything. It's a privileged user. But because my container is unprivileged one, even if I escape this container, on host I would be seen as some random user with ID of 100,000, so I would not be able to do much there. That's why we always should use unprivileged containers whenever we can. Okay, but the question is, so what can we change for unprivileged container so we can read and write to that remote location? And as always with Linux, there are many ways we can solve it, but I picked one that I think it's the easiest to explain. We will simply mount that shared folder from OMV on the host by matching the user ID and group ID of the container user and not the host user. Let me show you what I mean. And maybe I will give you two examples, one for container user root and the other for container user or something else. We'll see, we will create one. But let's just delete what we created. Let's go to the container, to the resources. This is our mount point, so let me just detach it. Yes. And as you can see, it doesn't clear. We would have to restart the service. I will just reboot it. And now log on again. That's it, and that mount point is now gone. So let's go to the Proxmox as well. To the PVE. And let's remove the mount point. So it's umount, and the location is MNT mini PC. That's it. So if I do mount L now, I don't have that mount point anymore. So I will clear that maybe again. Let's just double check the container. This is our container, and the root ID is 00. So here on the Proxmox itself, we will do something else now. I will run mount t, or you know what, let me just up arrow. That was our command, yes? That's what I need, but I want to change the values here after that O. I will use the ID of the container plus 100,000. So basically, just run UID equals 100,000. Group ID equals also 100,000. That's the only change. Now I press enter, asks me for password. Password for that Samba user on the OpenMediaVault it was. And now if I run mount-l, I can see that mount again, but this time the difference is my user ID is 100,000 and the group ID is 100,000. What also changed, let me clear that maybe, if we go to cd mnt, if I do lsl, have a look here. Our user ID is 100,000 and group ID is also 100,000, and the mount command did that for me. So I don't have to run like change owner or something, chown command. That's done during mount process. Okay, so that's the first step. Now we have to pass it further to the container. So let's maybe go back to the container again. If I do cd lsl, maybe we've got already shared. We can see the permission changed as well to root, but that doesn't really matter. Let me create maybe some different folder now. Make dir, I don't know, omv root, something like that. lsl. No, sorry, that doesn't look good. rem ref omv. Let's go to root folder, to this one, because that's the home folder for the root user, and let's create it here. Make dir omv root. So we are in root folder and we've got omv root subfolder inside. And we will try to bind this one, just to make it different, you know. So I go back to Proxmox. Maybe I will use up arrow again. That was the command, and I could use that shared folder. I just wanted to show you the difference. I will just change that shared to the one that we've just created. Root omv root. Press enter. Okay. The mount point should be created. If I go here, I can see mount point pointing to root omv root. So if I go to container, let's cd to that omv root. If I run lsl, I can see the files from OpenMediaVault. But this time, if I touch, let's say Marek3, txt, I can create new files. And indeed, if I use that window from my MacBook, you already see the file was created on OpenMediaVault. So this time I can not only read, but I can also write to that remote location. Let me run lsl. You can see now 3 files. And that's how it's configured for root user on the container and how we pass it on the Proxmox for that root user. But what if I have different user here on the container? Maybe I installed application, maybe Nginx, maybe Jellyfin, whatever, and it doesn't use a root user, it uses some different user. Let's do it now. And you will see that it's not that complicated really. We just follow the same guide. Let me see the bug. Maybe let's destroy again everything, alright? I will just detach this. Yes. I will reboot the container to fully get rid of that. And I will also go to Proxmox again, to the PV, and I will unmount the MNT mini PC. So if we cd to MNT, we can see that mini PC belongs to root and group root again. Okay, let's jump back to the container again. Let's create a user. I will run sudo add user. Sorry, I don't need sudo because I'm already root, but never mind. And I will call it Marek. I will create a password. And I will switch to that user, su-marek. Now, I'm not root anymore, I'm user Marek. Let me clear that. And if I run ID, my ID is 1000 for the user, and the group ID is also 1000. And that makes sense, because that's the first user that has been manually created on that container, and the Linux numbers those users starting from 1000. And if I run pwd, print working directory, you can see I also have my home directory created, home Marek. So maybe I will create another folder here. I will make dir omv Marek this time. lsl. So the full path is home Marek omv Marek to this folder. Now let's go back to the Proxmox, and now on Proxmox I will use up arrow again because I'm lazy. So user Marek has user ID 1000. I have to add another 100,000 to match this user ID on the host, on the Proxmox host, which means I have to put here 101,000 for both user ID and group ID. Now I press enter, password for Samba user. That's it. If I run mount L, I can see it again, but this time for another user ID and group ID. Let's clear. If I go to... no, sorry, I'm already here. So if I run lsl, this time my mini PC folder has user ID 101,000 and group ID 101,000. Now, the only thing we have to do is pass it further to the container. We have mount point from the Proxmox to the OpenMediaVault, but the missing bit is from the Proxmox itself to the container. So we create that using pct command. I will up arrow again. But this time, the mount point on the container was, what was it? Home Marek omv Marek. That was the folder. I press enter, and that's it. Let's go back to the container. If I run lsl, nothing changed. If I cd to omv Marek, lsl, I can see the content of the OpenMediaVault, but if I touch new file, marek4.txt, I can write to it as well. So lsl, I have now write permissions. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. That solves our issue, but there is maybe one more thing worth mentioning. This solution is not only for Proxmox, because you can create virtual machines and LXC containers on any Linux distribution. Proxmox only provides that nice user interface, but it does not implement anything new, really. All functions here are already included in Linux distro that Proxmox is running on. So basically you can run those methods on any Linux distribution, that's what I mean. It's not limited to Proxmox, which runs on Debian anyway. And yeah, we can use Proxmox graphical user interface to create containers, etc. But there is nothing stopping you from using the simple Linux command lines for all those tasks that we performed here. Because, for example, you can create container clicking this button, but you can also use, like, what if I run LXC info and the name of my container, which is 203. You know, this is Linux command you can run on any Linux distro. And you can, like, download the templates, you can create your containers, and you can do everything you want using just Linux command line. You can see my container is up and running, you can even see the IP address, etc. And then what we have, the mount command. The mount command is already like a Linux command line, so no need to explain that. But if you wonder what that pct set 203 command does, because it looks like a Proxmox container tools or whatever it's called, but all it does really is it simply adds one line to the configuration of my container. And the configuration of my container can be found in etc pve LXC. So if I run lsl here, you can see this is the configuration of my container 203, and if I cut it, all that pct command does, it simply adds this line and then restarts the service. And you notice that I rebooted the container instead, but that's only because they are so quick to reboot, and it does the same job. But I could manually just add that line, reboot the container, and I would end up with the same status. So yes, that's all I wanted to say today. I hope that all makes sense. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I will try to answer as much as I can. And thank you for watching.